Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intelligence Brief. We hadn't had one of these in a while. I was on vacation. We had some other things that were going on, so we haven't been able to get to it. But I know a lot of you really like this one. It's where we basically take the best of what we learned during the week, because I know everybody can't watch every show here, and I want to make sure you get the really important things, kind of bring you up to date. And as always, there's new information that we have that's breaking even today. And so we've got some of that as well. Think you're going to like this show. Definitely want to bring you up. One of the first things we want to talk about is related to the Russia-Ukraine war. We've done a couple of shows this week, especially in the latter part of it, on bringing you updated on both the tactical and the strategic situation in the Russia-Ukraine war as related to the Kursk invasion or incursion that the Ukraine side has done. You can go back and certainly watch all of those clips at any time you want to. But there was a kind of a response. One of the things we were waiting on was, what is Putin going to do? In fact, I think one of the titles of one of our shows this week was, where is the counterattack that Putin is supposed to have been charged? Well, yesterday, but we saw it today. Putin has said that he actually is going to do something. And Anatoly Antonov, Russia's ambassador to the United States, said, I don't know if you can read that or not. It says, "I tell you sincerely that the president has made a decision." The TASS state news agency quoted Antonov as saying, "I am firmly convinced that everyone will be severely punished for what has happened in the Kursk region." And they went on to talk about that they were going to leave a lot of part of it's ambiguous in terms of what's going to happen, what he means by that he's going to punish everybody. Is he talking about like the Russian generals who were caught unawares and were not prepared for it? Is he talking about the United States? Is he talking about Ukraine specifically? They left that, they said, intentionally vague, so they're not quite sure who's going to be who's in the target here. But it's important to understand that Putin is under a lot of domestic pressure, actually, to take decisive action. And it's not really hard to figure out if you think about it. And oftentimes we don't think about it, especially in the West, because Russia's the evil empire. Vladimir Putin is a modern day Hitler, who's bereft of any kind of morality or even humanity. So he's kind of like a caricature. That plays well in the media, especially in those who already hate Russia, but it doesn't actually help to anybody who's trying to figure out actually what is going on and to try to assess where things could go, because he's very much a nationalist leader of his country, and he does want his country to succeed. He does respond to things. He's a normal person. Even though he takes actions that we may abhor, for his people, he does. And so he is animated, even like, frankly, Stalin was, for all of his genuine vile and evil and wickedness. He was still animated by domestic issues and influenced by those things. And Putin is no exception to that. And so with this incursion into his country, it's the first time since 1941. And that's important to know, that one of the things that has animated Russia from the beginning has been the fact that they have been invaded many times over the years. When we hear that that the West side always talks about, and NATO repeats indefinitely and have been since 2008, that, hey, NATO's a defensive alliance. We're not going to attack anyone. We're just going to continue to advance up to the Russian border, and we're going to put in, Ukraine in one day, but it's no threat to anybody else. That works for us because we think that that's true. Many in the West, most in the West, think, well, we're never going to actually invade Russia, so they shouldn't even be worried about it. But that's looking at it from a Western perspective, and especially an American perspective. We haven't been invaded since 1812 by the British. Okay, our country has been secure and safe, so we're never worried about that. We have the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans providing our flank security. We have friendly Canada and Mexico on our north and south, so we have no worries about that. That's not the case for Russia. Russia has always been afraid of being invaded, and they have been many times from the West. You've obviously got Napoleon in the 19th century. You've got Hitler in the 20th century, and so now they're worried about the 21st century. So, and it goes back even further than that. But especially along those plains, you had both Napoleon and Hitler's forces use that pathway right up through Ukraine as an invasion route into Russia. It's very difficult from a military perspective to defend against that area. So they have some genuine fears of being invaded. Now then, there has been a physical incursion into their country, and that has played into the fears that the Russians have. Putin has therefore come under lots of pressure to take decisive action. He can't just say, all right, we'll deal with this when we get around to it or later on, because there's been, I think the number right now is 130,000 civilians who have been evacuated from the area north, and they're trying to figure out where to put all those people. So there's a scramble going on. Obviously, the whole news is riveted to all this. They're really angry about the fact that their territory has been invaded. They didn't expect it to happen. They have some anger and animosity at the military for having been caught unawares for the second time in this war, for not having strong enough border security. But of course, overall, the biggest concern, the biggest anger comes at the West for having done this, having supported it, for Ukraine for having done it, and the West for having supported it. So that's why when Antonov makes that comment that Putin said everybody who's responsible is going to pay, we have to take notice and try to figure out what exactly does that mean. Now, we have already seen some elements of movement of the Russian forces elsewhere in Russia. Some in the Belarus area are moving around. There's been a lot of train loads of vehicles moving around inside, so it's unclear what Russia's going to do. They have moved troops in there already, and they have effectively contained the breach into Kursk. As we reported yesterday, there's additional concentrations of Ukraine forces on the border in a couple of different other spots, which may actually add to new incursion points. And Russia's certainly paying attention to that. So they have lost the ability to have surprise anymore, but sometimes mass can overcome surprise. So it's not clear that incursion itself is over. And in any case, containing it is one thing, but then if Putin's going to survive and maintain the support of his people, he's going to have to move and to cut that thing off. At the same time, he's fighting in the eastern part there. And that's part of his dilemma, is that part of the reason is likely from the Ukraine side is that they wanted to force Putin to redeploy forces from the eastern front, especially in Pokrovsk, in Toretsk, in the Chasiv Yar area, et cetera, maybe even Kupiansk, and to move those guys back up to the north to deal with this invasion here. So far, apparently, Russia has done a little bit of that, but they haven't done a whole lot of it. So they have decided to take some risk with the Kursk invasion and have continued the pressure in the east. And it's having success because they are buckling the territory, and they're continuing to take big chunks, or relatively big chunks, in the direction of Pokrovsk, in Toretsk, and several of the small villages around there. So far, it doesn't look like this is going to have a lot of success for the Ukraine side long term, especially, but more so if the diversion of these mobile troops to the north into the Kursk area actually makes their defenses insufficiently strong to hold the line. And if Russia breaks through that, and then if Russia then mobilizes troops from elsewhere, not at the front line, but elsewhere in Russia to eliminate that incursion, they could lose all those troops, and they could have a breakthrough here. And ironically, that could actually hasten the military defeat of the Ukraine side. So it's a huge gamble here. Right now, it's not looking, at least public opinion-wise, it's not looking as good for Putin, but that could change pretty quickly, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. Relatedly, we had Larry Johnson on this week, and one of the things he was talking about is what Putin could do here, and how a lot of people have complained, in a certain sense, from the West that, or actually accused is probably a better way, that maybe Russia's not that strong because they haven't taken any decisive action in this whole Kursk area. Not only have we given permission to use our long-range weapons into Ukraine, now then we've apparently, or at least we've been accused of having authorized a physical attack into the Russian territory. And so when Putin makes this comment about he's going to punish everybody who was responsible for this, the question is, does that include the United States and or NATO? Larry Johnson talked about what he thought about what could possibly happen.
Up to this point, people say, well, what's the difference between a special military operation and a war? In a war, you get civilians killed. You destroy significant infrastructure. You make the country unlivable that is going to have to be completely rebuilt. Up to this point, the Russians have avoided significant, even consequential civilian casualties in places like Kiev and Lvov. They focused upon hitting military infrastructure. They focused upon taking out factories and warehouses where armaments are stored. That's going to expand. So I think what you're looking at is even the potential that now Russia may be, at the time of its choosing, will take out USISR, up to and including our satellites. It could get that serious, because what they view now is the United States has crossed a red line. They have invaded Russia. Russia's not going to step back and go, oh, no big deal, no harm, no foul. No, we're past that.
And it's ironic that even since that, should we aired that show, many in the United States are continuing to say, you know what, we keep allegedly crossing these red lines, but nothing happens. Let's keep going. Let's keep crossing even more red lines. In a tweet, I think earlier this afternoon, you had Admiral Stavridis actually advocate that we go further. Gary, if you could throw that tweet up on the line screen, that would be great. Because part of the thought process is that, hey, you know, we keep hearing about that Russia says you can't do all this stuff, but we do, and nothing happens. So we should not even hold ourselves back. You may recall that at the beginning of this Kursk incursion, in fact, Zelensky kind of berated the West and the United States in particular by saying, you're kind of naive if you think that Russia's going to do anything. They're not. So now then that whatever it is, 16 days, I think, has passed. Now then they're saying, hey, well, maybe there isn't going to be anything, so we can keep going. Do we have that tweet up? There we go. Yeah. So he says it is far past time to unleash Ukraine against Russia. While I'm respectful of the risk of escalation, there will not be serious negotiations without more pressure on Putin. We should support Ukraine attacks of any kind within 300 miles of the border. We need to remember who actually started this. Yeah, that was just this morning. Look, first of all, that's just, it's more nonsensical stuff from someone who's supposed to know better, an admiral, that the only thing holding back has just been that Ukraine has been unwilling to attack hard. Dude, they have been fighting nonstop since February of 2022. And look, and I still to this day still give them props for just ferocious fighting. And they have been standing up against all kinds of long odds. And even when things are now, the fundamentals are, in my view, decisively and irrevocably against them, they still fight. They still stand up and fight. So the idea that you want to say that we need to unleash them like we're holding them back, and that's the only thing, if we just do and let the leash off, that the wild dogs are going to, you know, I don't know, go marching on to Moscow or to Kursk City. Who knows what he actually has in mind? He didn't get into it there, but that's just ridiculous. It's amazing that they have gotten as far as they have because they caught Russia unprepared, but they're not unprepared anymore. So if you want to unleash and send folks up there, first of all, where are you going to get the troops from? Which troops are you going to unleash? It's not like that there's these pools of scores of thousands of troops just hanging around looking for something to do, and you can just pick up like game pieces and put them in play here or put them in play over there. That's not how it works. That's not how it is on the ground. And for him to say that means either he doesn't know what's actually the case on the ground, which doesn't seem reasonable, or it's hard for me to come up with another one. Because if you do understand that, if you do know that there are limitations, physical limitations in the number of troops that are available, then why would you say something like that? Because then you specifically say, yeah, launch even up to 300 miles. Like this incursion here, which I think has gone at its farthest point, 35 kilometers. You want to go 10 times further with that, and towards what event? See, here's the problem. That men like Stavridis and certainly many other people in both in and outside of government in the United States and the NATO believe that because Russia hasn't done anything so far, they never will. Because they haven't had this big arrow movements and big arrow offensives, as we talk about, where they have, you know, hundreds of thousands of troops just flooding in an area, whatever, maybe something like we saw in Desert Storm or something in World War II with some of these big movements that went across the plains of Europe, et cetera. Because we haven't seen that, Russia can't and therefore never will, because they never can. They never will be able to, and that they're very limited, so that we should take advantage of that and just keep on attacking. There's many problems with that, but one of the key ones is towards what end? You hear me say that all the time. And this is another big place in light of his comments there. What are you even talking about? What is the objective that you suppose is going to be accomplished by now unleashing a range of 300 miles into Russian cities? Is that going to change the war? Is that going to somehow change the front line? Is that going to protect Pokrovsk? The answer is no, for people who wonder. Some people may think, well, yeah, maybe it will. No, it won't. And it's not even hard to figure this out. Russia is a very big country. They have a lot of air defense systems. And you see a lot of these drone strikes that have been happening in the last couple of days inside Russia. Only a few of them have gotten through. Most of them have been shot down, and there just haven't been that many because Russia has pretty robust air defense. No air defense is perfect. Some did get through, and it hurt Russia pretty good, but it's a pain point. It's basically a punch. But you don't have enough missiles and enough capacity to actually do anything of any strategic value. And if you're not convinced of that, then look at the opposite side of this. Look at what's happened to Ukraine. Now, they have had almost no air defense, or very, very limited anyway, and very little air power of their own. And Russia has been free for at least the last full 2 years, and really on and off throughout the entire war, to be launching salvo after salvo of long-range missiles, drones, rocket fire. All kinds of long-range things have been flying throughout their country, and I mean throughout the entire country. And yet it has not prevented Ukraine from continuing to put up defense, continuing to be able to build new forces. It's hurt them. It's hurt them a lot in some areas, but it's not been decisive anywhere. And that's with almost no constraints other than as fast as Russia can manufacture missiles and get them in the air. Now, why do you think that a handful of Ukraine missiles are going to do to the massive country of Russia what all of Russia's missile forces so far have not accomplished in the Ukraine side? It's irrational, and it wouldn't. What it might do, though, is to continue to poke the bear in the face and poke him in the eye. Now, you can do that, but at some point that bear's going to get angry and it's going to do something. And listen, I know people don't like to talk about it because we love to say that the Russian side has, been doing all these war crimes and has been killing civilians, et cetera, but they haven't been doing a fraction of what they could be doing. They could say, we're going to pull all the gloves off, and now they're going to go against areas that don't even have defenses. Like what Russia is doing in this Kursk area. There were a very limited number of military bases. In fact, so far, all the incursions were in purely civilian areas where there weren't any military outposts, where there weren't any bases or anything else. It was purely civilian areas that they went into. Russia hasn't done that yet. Now, maybe they'll change their mind. And that's actually one of the things that Larry was talking about there. We don't know for sure what is going to be their pressure points before they finally start taking action, because they haven't done those things, but they can. And the more people like Stavridis say, let's keep launching missiles in there, we may one day find that the patience of Vladimir Putin runs out. More on that in a minute. We also had John Mearsheimer on this week, and while we're talking a lot about the Russia-Ukraine war, and we also talk quite a bit about the Israeli-Hamas war and the potential expansion into Lebanon and into Iran proper, because of all things that are going on there. We're still waiting for Iran, by the way, to respond in some way to the assassination of Haniya in their capital a little over 2 weeks ago. So that's still kind of a tension place here. But there's been so much focus on that, not just on our show, but of the U.S. military, that John Mearsheimer suggests maybe we're not paying enough attention, and these are having ramifications elsewhere in the world.
We're not really pivoting to Asia as much as we should be if you're bent on containing China. That there may be an opportunity for the Chinese to take advantage of the United States in the South China Sea. But I don't think that's true over Taiwan. I don't think there's going to be any trouble over Taiwan or any conflict over Taiwan in the foreseeable future. I'm not saying that's 100% certain, but I think it's highly unlikely. South China Sea is a different matter. And you do want to appreciate the fact that we are so deeply involved in the Middle East and in Ukraine that we do not have that much time to spend thinking about deterrence and containment in East Asia.
Now, if the United States really had a strategy, if we actually had people that were thinking about things in a global context and looking at various actors in different parts of the world, looking at our defense industrial base, our weapon stockpiles, our number of troops, the places that they're scattered all over the world, and we said, all right, let's have one coherent plan to make sure that our priorities are properly resourced, properly manned, properly funded, et cetera. We have a sustainment capability. So let's don't, get over our skis, as they say sometimes. If we had that, then what we would certainly be doing is saying, you know what, we need to get this war between Russia and Ukraine over with right away. Just get this deal nipped in the bud. It's like a bad business deal. It has no chance of success. Any money and material we keep pumping into it is actually just going to end up being a sunk cost that goes into the trash, and it won't have any positive results because the fundamentals just aren't there. So let's get that knocked off. Let's put pressure on Israel to have a negotiated settlement so we can stop the bleeding there, both for moral reasons of the Palestinian people, but also because we keep sending ammunition and weapons into both of these regions here. And then let's start to get our own stockpiles rebuilt back up. And if we even think about we're wanting to pivot to another part of the world, into the Indo-Pacific, then we're going to need more resources. That's what we would do if we were wise. And then we would do everything to avoid any other wars and continue to rebuild our strength, our training, et cetera, so that if we get caught surprised somewhere, another Pearl Harbor type situation, then we're immediately ready to retaliate, to respond, and immediately give somebody a bloody nose, et cetera, to prevent anything further. That's what a wise person would do. We don't have a lot of wise people in Washington. We might not have any in power. And so instead, what we do is we look at all of these things in isolation, like they're all a stovepipe kind of situation. And we don't even think about how all of those things I talked to you about are interrelated. And John was talking about the possibility of something happening in the Indo-Pacific there. He thinks that the chances are higher of something in the South China Sea than he does if something were to happen in Taiwan. A lot of that's unknown, and many people have different views on that. I'm kind of split on what I think may happen. But I think something is much more likely to happen in Taiwan than the South China Sea. I think, in fact, a lot of their issues in the South China Sea with the Chinese, some of these bases that they're having in these artificial islands, et cetera, are to defend against a potential response to a Taiwanese situation. I don't see any evidence that China is willing to act on any of these long-time territorial disputes that there's like a dozen or so among many different nations, 7, 8, 10, something like that. China, Philippines, Japan, et cetera. Many people have disputes which have existed for many, many decades, and they have not resulted in any kind of conflict, and there's no reason to think they would now. The Taiwan situation, on the other hand, is a much more emotional issue for China and is much more on the front burner. And you have had, at least Biden, I think it's at least 4 times during his administration, said the U.S. would defend Taiwan if it came to a fight with China. Now, all 4 of those, they then kind of walked them back. But when you see he says something and he walks it back, and then he says it again and walks it back, you start to think, okay, well, whatever you guys are saying is one thing, but he keeps saying that he's actually going to defend Taiwan. No one knows for sure, but certainly a lot of people are acting as though we would. But this is where we need a dose of reality. Okay, reality has to get into your thinking. If you're not willing to do an overall strategic view and an understanding of how everything works together, at least look at this one stovepipe in terms of all of the factors that involve with it. If we were to get involved with a war with China, we could probably hold our own for a week. Okay, especially if it's a no-notice kind of situation, because, and there's been numerous war games been done on this for a long time, and everyone is aware now publicly that in terms of how much ammunition our ships and our naval fleets that are always at sea have on them is enough for 1, maybe 3 weeks, depending on the category. And that's it. So if we got into a no-notice war and all of a sudden we're fighting with China on their front doorstep, because that's where this would be, they have within range on land-based capabilities thousands upon thousands of missiles. We don't. So even if all of our defenses worked flawlessly, and they never always work flawlessly, and all of our missile interceptors intercepted all of their attempts to either with torpedoes or unmanned boats, or certainly aircraft, missiles, cruise missiles, et cetera. If we shot every single one of them down, we can stay afloat for about a week. But what's going to happen when you run out of interceptor missiles? You see where this is going, right? It's going to the bottom of the South China Sea. Because if you have this flotilla out there, these aircraft carriers, these destroyers, other frigates, other kinds of warships, and they don't have air defense missiles, and China just keeps on having enough to just keep throwing them out one after the other, all of a sudden you're going to be defenseless, and all your ships are going to either have to flee or they're going to be at the bottom of the sea. That's just the reality of it. Now, why people don't accept that, who have the power, I guess the only thing is they think it's a, quote, show of force, and that no one's ever going to call us on it, so we don't have to worry about it. And we'll just keep playing the game, and China will never challenge us. They'll never attempt it, and we'll never have to make good on it. That's the most plausible analysis and assessment. It's also stupid and very foolish and very risky, because if something does break out for whatever reason, whether it's an intention by China, whether it's an accident, it's a miscalculation, somebody does something dumb, and all of a sudden you have all these actions and counteractions, it won't make any difference, because, yeah, we will have the ability to hurt China, but we won't have the ability to defend ourselves, and all of our surface fleets could be gone that are in the region there, whatever happened to be in range. It could be all gone. And China has no problem continuing to make more. If we think Russia has their defense industrial base up to a wartime footing, we're not even aware, most of us, that China has foreseen this issue for many, many years, and they have built a much bigger defense industrial base than what we have. So they can sustain a war a lot better right now than we could. It would take us years to get our defense industrial base up to capacity where we could go on a conventional level with China, but the war would be over long before that. So obviously, it's foolish to be dancing around the edges of something that could result in your actual annihilation of your air and ground and sea fleets in that part of the world, in the Indo-Pacific. If you can't sustain them with ammunition, defensive as well as offensive, why would you want to keep them there and keep with the rhetorical, threatening that we do, and claims that we're this strong nation, we're going to do all this stuff, if you aren't able to? So that's really one of the bigger issues that I wanted to highlight here since John brought that topic up, is that we need to go back to where, and we did used to, we need to do again, where we have strategic thinking and understanding how all of these things work together. The stuff in the Middle East, the stuff in Europe, the stuff in the global South, and the stuff in the Indo-Pacific. They all are tied together because they all go back, especially to the defense industrial base and our ability to sustain all the classes of supply and ammunition that are needed for war. And of course, that's supposed to all be capped over by a wise and sane diplomacy and foreign policy, which hasn't been seen really since 9/11. We haven't really seen anything related to that since 9/11, unfortunately. Let's pray that we don't ever have to discover how bad that is. Okay, moving on next. Next, we had Doug McGregor on this week, but before I show you the segment from that show, I want to show you something that he said back in June, which I think is pretty poignant, because he made some comments back then which are pretty relevant to what's been going on right now. Watch this first.
I think the Russians would like to end this by the end of September. And if you're going to try and end this conflict before the end of September, you've got to cross the river. We've been lied to so much about the Russians. We don't understand the rationality behind their behavior. The last thing that Vladimir Putin wants to do is rule Ukrainians. The areas that he's got control of right now are overwhelmingly Russified or Russian. He's not interested in ruling Ukrainians. He wants the Ukrainians to rule themselves. He just wants them to be neutral and not present a threat to Russia. His patience has paid off. Everybody that wanted him, and I was one of them, that thought, the biggest mistake you can make is not to decisively attack, launch the offensive, and end this thing. But he was smarter, and he said, no, we don't need to do that. As long as these Ukrainians will impale themselves on our defenses, let them do it.
Now, that's what's been happening, and certainly all during the 2023 Ukrainian offensive, and then in this current, in the whole calendar year here, 2024, all along that long line of contact I keep showing you. The Ukraine side keeps throwing themselves into the defense. Russia keeps putting a lot of firepower in there, and the casualties just keep mounting. Now then, with this new incursion into Kursk, that's actually playing out even more, because in a sense, this is kind of like what happened with the Bakhmut meat grinder that you remember from 2023, 2022, and 2023, when the Russians were surrounding this place. And instead of recognizing they couldn't hold it, the Ukraine side, and falling back to the next prepared position, they just kept throwing reinforcements into it over and over. And Russia went, okay, we'll keep killing them in large numbers. And that was pointed out that it was something that was militarily unsustainable. The Ukraine side kept doing it, and they ended up losing tens of thousands of troops in that one pointless battle. Now then, early evidence are that they're starting to repeat that in the Kursk offensive, because instead of just having this thing like a raid where they went in there, gained a lot of territory, maybe got some prisoners, and then withdrew back to their lines, they have brought actually engineering equipment up to try and stay and trying to prevent Russia from driving them out. And they keep sending in more and more reinforcements. I've seen that they've sent at least elements of 8 different brigades up into the salient to try and hold on to it and to expand it if they want to. But the point is, they don't have the capacity. You're not going to invade Russia with like 20,000 guys, which apparently is the sum total of all the things so far. And Russia has again shown some patience in that they have not massed a bunch of people and just pell-mell ran in there to try to drive everybody out. Instead, what they're doing is that they're just like they did in Bakhmut. They're methodically using air power, long-range artillery, short-range artillery, mortars, drones especially, and the targeted use of troops in there, especially when they're in some abilities to try and interdict some supply columns and whatever that the Ukraine side has had. So they're trying to minimize their manpower, their casualties, and maximize their use of firepower to create Ukrainian casualties. And folks, there's just no practical way that you can sustain this. You don't have 8 more brigades of people to just keep throwing in when thousands upon thousands are killed and wounded. At some point, you're going to run out of men pretty quickly because you're already suffering on the Eastern Front, as we pointed out before. So Russia so far appears content to let Ukraine keep throwing reserves in there and keep throwing artillery, bombs, and other shells on top of them as they come in there. Now, at some point, he is going to have to move, Putin is, decisively to get them out, because the Russian people, they're going to have patience too, but it's probably not quite as extensive as Putin's is. And at some point, he's going to need to get them forced out of there. We'll see how long it takes. I mean, it could take a month or two. Maybe it's only going to be a few weeks. It's unclear how many more troops Ukraine has to put in. That's really the big unknown. We know that there are still several pockets of fairly large size troops on the Ukraine side. We don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to expand their offensive into different areas, or if those guys are also going to keep feeding in, and maybe they will, and it could drag out another 2 or 3 months potentially before they're driven out there. But again, at extraordinary cost. But you're not going to stay there. And even the Ukraine leadership has said that's not their intention. They said, well, we know we're not going to stay. Then what are you doing in there? So you see that Putin is so far willing to say that's okay. We're going to just kill all of you guys in a manner of our choosing. So we'll see how this plays out. But I suspect it's going to play out just like it did in Mariupol early in the war, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and in the area now so far going towards Pokrovsk. It's having that same methodical band. Russia did the same thing in all of them and the same outcome. And there's no reason to think this one's going to be any different, because Russia has no shortage of manpower or bombs to keep putting into it. Okay, so that was in June. Now, earlier this week, Zelensky himself, in talking about this incursion into the Kursk area, addressed the whole situation. He said, okay, we've got this fight going on here in the east. We've also got this going on here, but don't worry, everything's fine. Watch this.
There have already been several reports by Commander-in-Chief Syrsky. The front line, our positions, primarily it is the Pokrovsk direction, our Donetsk region. We understand the enemy's steps, and we are getting stronger. We have checked the ammunition supply, and it is very important that our partners really fulfill their obligations on each package, on all our agreements. This is fundamental for our defense. Our operation in the Kursk region, our combat work continues. Steps are being taken. We control the designated areas.
So we control the designated areas today. That was on the 21st. That was a couple of days ago. But as I just pointed out there, the fundamentals are not in his favor. And he did talk about that a little bit. He did admit it a little bit by trying to chide the Western supporters and saying, hey, I've checked the ammunition status and it ain't great. and I need more. And in the other venues, he actually explicitly called out the United States and Great Britain in particular, and a handful of other countries as well, saying, hey, you guys promised this stuff. Where's it at? We need it like yesterday. I'm not sure how far he's going to get with that, because look, these other countries, as I've been saying for a long time, they're not at war. The UK is not at war. They like PR stuff. They love to harm Russia, but they're not at war. The United States is not at war either so far. And so that animates our economic decisions and our business choices. So Ukraine, although they've tried to expand everything that they can, industrial capacity, because they want full on everything. Their problem is that a lot of it gets bombed and blown up because of the Russians, because they don't have the air power. Russia, likewise, they're in an existential fight in their view, and they have pulled out all the stops. They have their defense industrial base going 24/7. It's a huge portion of their economy right now, and they're holding very little back. Maybe nothing at all. They possibly could even expand bigger if they got into a full war on mobilization. But what they call the special military operation, that category so far, it's maxed out and going on there. We, on the other hand, aren't. So we have increased things. We get these contracts to increase the capacity here. And when this $61 billion bill was passed early this year, it's incrementally increasing some of these things, but only incrementally. It's not providing the numbers. It's never going to match in current state what Russia is able to do. Russia with Iran and North Korea and their help, and Ukraine with all these 50 nations that are allegedly helping is like 25% of what the Russian side is putting together. You don't have to be a genius in math to see that 25% versus 100%, this 25% is not going to make it long term. Doesn't matter how many troops you have, and they don't have enough, but what they do have can't physically survive when the other side has 4-to-1 at least ammunition supply across all categories combined. It's just never going to work out. So if Zelensky is expecting there to be some change, one might wonder if his on-screen persona is a little bit more cocky than his off-screen persona. And in fact, earlier this week, Doug suggests he's probably more aware of what's going on than you may think. Here's what he said.
Two things we have to keep in mind. First of all, contrary to whatever Mr. Zelensky says publicly, privately, we know his bags are packed. He's moved his billions into bank accounts in places like Cyprus, Albania, Switzerland. He's bought estates in Italy. He's got a place here in Florida, where not far from where I am in Orlando. He's ready to go. And as soon as it becomes obvious to him that the Russians are advancing on him, he's going to be on a plane, and he'll probably pack that with whatever cash is left, just as we saw in Afghanistan. Some of your viewers will remember that people left Afghanistan and that corrupt government with carloads of U.S. cash. I think you're going to see something very similar when the time comes with Mr. Zelensky. That is, of course, if the Ukrainians, who are increasingly sick of him, contrary to what we're told in the mainstream media, don't bump him off, which I think is a real possibility. In fact, it may be Ukrainian soldiers who have been paying a horrible price in this war that eventually dispose of him.
Now, I'll just tell you, I don't have any of that knowledge that Doug was talking about. I don't know anything about any alleged bank rolls he has elsewhere or escape routes. I don't know any of that stuff, but I do know that what Doug mentioned there about the recent past was true, and that is the Ashraf Ghani, the leader of Afghanistan, certainly did have a lot of that, and certainly a lot of the money that we had given them over the years, a lot of it found its way into big bags and boxes that he had kept, and he assembled pretty quickly on a helicopter and rolled out of Dodge before the Taliban rolled into the capital city of Kabul. It's not at all unexpected that something like that could happen again. I mean, it's human nature. It certainly has happened a lot in the past, but Zelensky does have to be concerned, and I know there's been many reports since early in the war that there are factions, to Doug's last point there about the potential for him to meet an untimely demise at his own people. There were reports, many reports early in the war, that one of the reasons why Zelensky wouldn't seek a negotiated settlement and didn't want to talk peace very much is because the hardliners in his country said, if you do, it won't be the Russians who take you out, it'll be us. Again, all I can say is that's what was reported. I don't know that. I don't have any firsthand information on that. I don't even have secondhand information. But when you do see the actions that were taken, it's plausible that that was true. And Zelensky then would be in a position that's just hard to even imagine the vice grip of pressure that he would be under, because even if he came to the same conclusions that we have, and he does basic math, and he sees we can never succeed at this, it's possible that if he says, all right, I'm going to change my mind, I'm going to go seek a negotiated settlement, that these hardliners could do exactly what the reports claim that they would. Simultaneously, or in addition to that, rather, it's also possible that if he made that course of action there, it's not some hardliners, but a lot of these people who have been fighting for 2.5 years. Because then they would be able to say, or it would certainly cross their minds that, hang on, you've been telling us, especially all the way back to 2023, all during the offensive, that we were going to win, that we were going to succeed, and that we were going to get whatever we needed from the West, and that we were going to be able to drive Russia out. And now then, after all this sacrifice, after all my friends have been killed and a bunch of others have had their limbs blown off, now you're going to negotiate? You can see where some would be pretty upset about that. Then you lied to us, or why didn't you do this earlier before these guys died, et cetera. And those are going to be some valid questions that are going to have to be answered, because folks, the math worked on February 24th, 2022. And as I've said many times, Russia was not as good as what we thought, that many thought they were, especially the U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who himself claimed on February the 5th, 2022, that Kiev could fall within 72 hours if Russia went on a full-scale invasion. That's what he thought. And that apparently that was communicated behind the scenes, which is why the U.S. moved its government out of Kiev before the war started, because they all thought the same thing. And then when it didn't happen, then they thought, okay, now it's never going to. But here's the problem. Russia is big enough and has enough resources that even though they made some big missteps early on, they could absorb them and come back and respond, and they have. So Zelensky should have made a deal for sure. Well, he should have made a deal in at least December 2021. He had a chance to do that. He didn't. He could have kept nominal control over everything. There wouldn't have even been a war. He chose not to. Then we had the war. Then at the Istanbul in the March, April 2022, again, he had a golden opportunity to hardly lose anything. This was before Russia annexed a bunch of stuff that the 4 oblasts that they would do later. So at that time, even that was still on the table. Now that was gone. Now in June, this past June, Putin made another offer that now didn't include either Crimea or these 4 oblasts, but did include letting them keep the rest. That's now off the table because of the incursion into Kursk, according to Putin and several of his senior advisors and other spokesmen for the country. Now you're in a situation to where Putin may not be willing to have any negotiations. He may be now willing to just say, we're going to take militarily whatever we want, even if it takes another half year, 2 years, who knows? It's unknown what his patience is or how brittle the Ukraine army still is. But we do know that things are getting really bad for them. And this offensive, well, it had a big media splurge for the Ukraine side and made everybody happy for a while, especially Lindsey Graham and the U.S. side. It's possible that actually accelerates their ultimately decline, because now then they don't have those troops available who were both equipped and trained to defend in the Pokrovsk area. And they're eventually going to be driven out of the north too. That's just numerical. They're just too small. They just can't stay there. So they could literally lose them all. They could lose everything because of this. It's unclear where it's going to happen, but what's going to happen to Zelensky, I don't know. I'm very confident, though, that when they were calling him the next leader of Britain, not Eisenhower, but when they were saying, when they said he's the next Winston Churchill, definitely that's not going to be the case. They're going to see that Churchill was a little bit different character than this guy, and the end results are definitely definitely not going to be the same. We're going to see how that's going to work out. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about today was something happened last night. So this is some new information. Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for President of the United States in the coming November election, at the Democratic National Convention last night in Chicago, made her big acceptance speech. And I did a show earlier today where I detailed a lot of the issues that are involved here, especially in national security. By all means, go and watch that. But I want to play one particular clip from her speech last night that I want to make sure everybody sees, because it's one of the more concerning to me when she's talking almost in religious terms about what she thinks the United States should do and how she sees the role of the country. And as the commander in chief, this is how she will view the world. Watch this.
And as president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand and I know where the United States belongs.
Now, when you combine that with other things that she said during the evening, that she wants a strong military, and she thinks that's her most important thing, and she wants to keep on supporting the Ukraine side, she wants to keep on supporting the Israeli side in their war, and just kind of into perpetuity, ignoring all the things that I just mentioned a minute ago about how you have to balance ways and means and objectives and how much resources you have, et cetera. Apparently, she doesn't do any of that kind of math. But when you view the world in these black and white, this camp and that camp, democracy, tyranny, I know where we belong. And with this strong military, we're going to do it. We're going to keep supporting everybody who's going on over here. Now, as I said earlier today, and I'll just briefly recount here, you're talking about the democracy side. You got to make sure that you're actually talking about democracy, because does Ukraine look like a democracy to you? They didn't have they decided not to have their presidential election, and now are allowing, despite its constitution, Zelensky to stay in power without an election. They have banned all the political parties that he didn't like. They banned all the media that weren't saying the things that he liked. They're banning even religious institutions that aren't adequately for the state, etc. They're forcing people to be mobilized, even despite what their constitution says. That doesn't sound much like a democracy, and yet we are using these religious, emphatic terms to say we're going to continue to defend you against the tyranny of the Russian side. So we've declared them to be tyranny and the bad guy, and so these guys are the good guys, and at all costs we should do it. You have the same situation in the Middle East also, with saying that we're standing by the Israeli government. Well, there's 5 million Palestinians in Israel, and they are as oppressed as any people can be, and have been for quite a long time. And that doesn't really sound like a democracy to me, in several other ways as well. And they're certainly not paying attention to any of the things we say. They're not listening to the International Criminal Court. They're not listening to some of the rulings that have come against them and saying that it's plausible they're creating genocide, etc. We're not listening to any of those kinds of things, but we are full-throated supporting them. And it's ironic, especially in the latter case there, because one of the other things that Kamala Harris said last night was that she believes that we should take care of the Palestinian people. And that was a sop to many of the Democratic voting base who cares a lot about the Palestinian people. And after the speech, we saw that message might not have resonated quite as much as she hoped when one of the networks did some voter reaction afterwards, and they asked what appears to be a Palestinian woman what she thought.
You're bombing our families with our money, and just one good speech is going to win us over again? I don't think so. So
that was a Palestinian American, someone who's apparently was an American citizen and will be able to vote. And she has been one of those that says, hey, why are we supporting this? The destruction of these people that you claim that you want to help, and yet you're providing all the ammunition, weapon, political support, diplomatic support, et cetera, so Israel can continue to do it. It's not real clear how that's going to come out, but you see that it's just a real problem when you have someone with this emphatic viewpoint, that almost like a messianic deal, that I'm going to defend the global democracy. And that kind of echoes what Biden said in his speech in the same place on Monday. to where he said, we are the greatest power. We're going to rule the whole world. No, he didn't say rule. I'm sorry. We're going to lead, was the phrase he used, but implied that we're going to rule it. And the world loves it for us. We're winning everywhere. If you think that, and yet you can see wreckage all over the place where we're definitely not winning, and you see that this nice, clean caveat of the world into those who are, quote, tyrants and those who are, quote, democracies, and we're standing with the one here, and we're going to use this military. You see there's all kinds of potential to get into even more trouble in the future. And listen, I'm not saying that Trump is any kind of panacea. He's not. There's a lot of things I have problems with, but at least in this one issue, he does seem to want to restrain the use of military power, not seek to, aggressively employ it elsewhere. And I have some concerns that Kamala Harris seems to be in this other category. And, there's frankly some concern that should she get in there, that because there's never been a woman president, and a lot of people are already suggesting, well, she's weak, she's not as strong as a man could be, she can't stand up to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, etc., Netanyahu even, or Zelensky. She can't stand up to any of these people. You can see just human nature where there might be a temptation for you to prove that you're actually pretty strong, and I'm going to use some power to show it, to demonstrate it. And that could be the worst of all cases if that happens. And we've certainly seen it in the past where people have done that very thing to disastrous results. So we'll see how that works out as well. We're going to continue to monitor it. But in all these things, like we do on all of our shows, we're going to show you the truth, because we're unintimidated and uncompromised about making sure you understand what's really going on. We're not going to let it get by where people just make these big grandiose statements without telling you the ramifications of what they could mean. And we're going to continue to do that. So we thank you for watching this week. Thank you for watching right now. Please do like and subscribe to here. And that's just a little bit of what we got coming up next week. Some great shows with Colonel McGregor, Larry Johnson, Chaz Freeman, Alex Mercurius. I'm really looking forward to having him back on, and probably some others we're trying to get on too. And you're not going to want to miss any of those. Any kind of news that's breaking, you can count on us to give you the scoop on what's going on as fast as it comes out. We will look forward to seeing you later, possibly even tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.